Okay, for the next half hour, I'm going to be talking to you about artifact. And so I'm going to look at a little fake news in EEG. You've heard about that? So I want to show you some examples of artifact. Some good, some bad, and some very, very ugly. And what I'm showing you relative to the pictures in the center are Richard Tatum and Hans Berger. Richard Tatum in the late 1800s and early 1900s was a scientist who initially discovered the electrical nature of the brain and laid the groundwork for Hans Berger, who in the 1920s then went on to identify and be credited for discovery of the EEG. And if I show you some patterns and you become a pattern recognizer, if you look at the EEG up in the upper left-hand corner, some of you might recognize this as what type of artifact? Anyone? Chewing artifact. And this was actually an example that was taken from an EEG of a patient treated for epilepsy because of a diagnosis of generalized polyspike and wave. True fact. Down in the lower left-hand corner, what does that appear to represent? If you look at the pattern, it might simulate something that's very similar to a focal seizure. However, it's a little backwards in the sense that there is a de-evolution, and it looks like it should be flipped, starting in a small number of electrodes and increasing to a larger number of electrodes. It does quite the opposite. In addition, if you drill down and look at the adjacent electrodes, you'll see double and triple phase reversals that are next to each other, signifying this as an artifact. And in this case, this was an individual that was actually being monitored in the epilepsy monitoring unit that started out with a rhythmic tremor of their extremity and then slowly started to decrease over time. The one that I'm showing you in the middle has no EEG. It's completely obscured by artifact. It's no longer contaminated. It's completely obscured. This was actually an individual with an LVAD with such mechanical properties that the electrical activity was so overwhelmed, it was basically an uninterpretable record. In the upper right, there's quite a different